Some of the best history is hidden in small details: a reply, a coin, a date, or a career that went in an unexpected direction. In the next few minutes, you'll see how each one changed the record in a way textbooks usually skip. He answered the king's call like a milk round. If the army wanted him, it would have to fit the job. Recruiters were trying to fill the ranks fast, using public appeals that spoke of duty, honor, and service. The milkman treated the pitch as practical work, asking what would happen to his route, his pay, and his customers. That reply turned the exchange into a joke, because it exposed how enlistment had to compete with everyday wages and routines. The story survives because it shows wartime persuasion meeting ordinary life, where a milk round could matter as much as a speech. In that gap between slogan and schedule, the joke became a small record of working-class judgment and a recruiting decision. A date on paper turned into a diplomatic fight, and the Netherlands eventually revised its recognition of Indonesia's independence to August 17, 1945. For years, the Dutch state had used a later date, tied to the transfer of sovereignty, while Indonesia held that independence began on the day it was declared in 1945. Johorjo Ratmangan helped press the issue through official channels, and the contradiction became harder to ignore because the wording in the record no longer matched Indonesia's position. The Dutch government updated its recognition date, and a formal statement replaced the older version in the diplomatic record. That change mattered because recognition is not just ceremony, it shapes how two countries describe the same past, and it leaves a paper trail that future diplomats can point to. A single coin inscription helped identify a lost Punic mint. Carmen Alfaro Assens studied Phoenician Punic coins at Spain's National Archaeological Museum, where tiny letters and symbols were part of her daily evidence. She compared one coin inscription with an 11th century tablet, and the matching written traces pointed to a production center history had not clearly identified. That comparison gave researchers a stronger case for a previously unknown Punic mint, turning a stray marking into a mapped place of production. The result was not a grand monument, but a careful link between small traces and a missing workshop in the historical record, the kind of clue that changes a catalog. She was sent where other reporters would not go, and that is how Katherine Johnson ended up covering civil rights for the Associated Press. In a bureau where she was the only woman, the easier beats often stayed with her male colleagues, while the harder or less wanted ones landed on her desk. That changed when civil rights coverage became part of the assignment list, because the story was unfolding in places many reporters still avoided. Those assignments put her close to marches, courtrooms, and fast-moving events, so her reporting reached readers with a view that many desks never saw. Being pushed to the margins can still place a reporter at the center of history, and Johnson's work shows how one assignment can shape what a newsroom decides to notice. A medieval artist put a skeleton on a bull, and that strange image is exactly why an art historian noticed a new kind of visual thinking. Millard Mice studied Gothic and Renaissance art, and he paid close attention to how medieval painters used tiny details to change familiar scenes. In one image, the skeleton is not just decoration, it is placed into motion, turning a familiar symbol into something more inventive and surprising. That kind of detail helps scholars see that medieval art could be inventive, not static, and that a small visual choice could mark a real shift in style. Mice built his reputation by reading those clues in painting, from Catalonia to Florence, and this one image shows how a single decision can leave a lasting trace in the record. One studio quietly filled churches with stained glass for nearly half a century, and Archibald John Davies helped make that possible. Davies worked in the arts and crafts movement, where design and handwork were meant to stay closely linked. At the Bromsgrove Guild of Applied Arts in Worcestershire, he built a studio system that could turn one commission into a repeatable process. Over 47 years, that workshop produced more than 300 windows, mostly for churches in Britain and overseas. The lasting story is not only Davies himself, but the studio discipline that carried his designs into many buildings and left a trace in church records. She was touring at 8, and that early skill carried her from Midwestern stages to Europe. Born in Iowa and raised in Minnesota and Missouri, Clara Eleanor Colby began performing at 7, then reached Germany in 1873. In Germany, she studied piano with Franz Liszt, then followed his advice to Vienna for voice and piano at the conservatory. After graduating in 1876, she trained her voice with Heinrich Prock, began at the Vienna State Opera, and sang leading roles in European theaters in 1877. She returned to the United States in 1878 and kept performing briefly before marriage in 1881, leaving a paper trail of lessons, travel, and timing. A Yugoslav finance minister also helped lead an astronomical society and an aero club. In interwar Yugoslavia, public life was small enough that ministers, scholars, and club organizers often moved through the same elite circles. That overlap mattered because astronomy and aviation were both symbols of modernity, and civic groups needed patrons who could connect ideas, money, and institutions. The result was a career that linked budget authority to public science, giving those societies access to influence, rooms, and credibility. Seen this way, the surprising title is not a contradiction but a trace of how one person could move between state office and modern clubs, leaving behind a paper record of shared ambition. History gets more interesting when you follow the overlooked clue instead of the headline. If you want more stories like these, subscribe and tell us which one surprised you most.